He posted for a cook before winter. A homeless mother and baby took the job. Far up in the North Fork country of Colorado Territory, the baby's cry cut through the frozen air as he set the coffee pot off the stove, a thin, desperate sound on the north wind. Thomas Riggs froze with his hand on the tin handle. Outside, the first real snow of the season drove across his high valley. He stepped to the door, pulled it open, and the cold hit his chest. On the porch, pressed close to the wall out of the wind, a woman stood with a bundle clutched to her chest, dress crusted with dust and frost, shawl too thin for a night like this. The baby in her arms wailed once, then coughed. She lifted her head, eyes dark and steady, though her hands shook. "You posted in town," she said, voice hoarse. "Need cook before winter, boy in the mercantile say Riggs Ranch up the North Fork." She swallowed, jaw tight. "I got hands. Can cook, can scrub. Nowhere else to go. My baby won't last another night in that wagon." Thomas took in the rest in one sweep, the wagon half off the track by his gate, the horse drooping in the drift, harness slack, dusk closing in at the valley edge, his corrals low and black to the left, cattle bunched in the lee of the fence, 3 miles of bad trail between here and any other roof. He'd tacked that scrap of paper up 2 weeks ago because winter up here could grind a man down on burned beans and cold biscuits. He had not pictured an empty-handed woman and a crying baby answering it on the worst day of the week. "You walk all the way from town?" he asked, already reaching for the bundle. She flinched, then forced her fingers open. The baby's face showed, red and pinched under a ragged cap. "Not mine to send away," she rasped. "I ride some, walk some, sleep none." She drew a shaking breath. "Name's Nora Lane," she added. "Not like it matters if you shut that door now." He did not shut the door. His hand closed instead on the baby's weight, lighter than he expected. Hot under the damp cloth. A tiny fist curled around his finger. Thomas turned, shoved the child against his chest under his coat to get heat on her, jerked his head toward the room. "Get inside," he said, voice flatter than he felt. "If you're lying, it's a fool lie. If you're not, then arguing out here kills your child faster than the wind." She stumbled past him, almost tripping on the threshold. He saw then how thin she was. Cheekbones sharp, dark hair hacked short, a canvas satchel hanging by a frayed strap. The smell of road dust and sour milk and fear in wool came with her. He shut the door on the storm, set the baby by the stove on his folded coat, and stoked the fire until sparks skittered up the iron. Inside, the cabin was 4 log walls, a narrow bed, table, 2 chairs, stove and shelves that suddenly looked thin for another mouth. Nora stood just inside, fingers spread on the table, eyes on the child. "Tell me straight," Thomas said, kneeling to check the baby's hands. They were clawed from cold, lips pale. "When did you last feed her?" Nora swallowed. "Morning," she answered. "Little watered milk before that." She shook her head. "The farm we hired on had dried up. No room for a woman with an infant when cattle started dying. They kept the bunkhouse boys, sent me off with a promise and $1. She gave a short, bitter laugh. Snow took both before noon. Thomas poured warm water in a clean mug, mixed in sugar and a splash of milk, tipped it slow toward the baby's mouth. She latched weakly, swallowing in small jerks. Nora's shoulders sagged with relief so sharp it looked like pain. He watched the color creep back into that small face, then looked up at the woman who'd carried her this far. "You saw the posting," he said. "I wrote man only, no family." The word sounded stupid with the baby's breath soft in his hands. She met his eyes. "You wrote you needed someone who could cook and keep this place standing when the wind came down," she said. "Men with no home and no child don't walk 20 miles through snow for that. They wait for spring." "I ain't asking you to marry me, Mr. Riggs," she added, anger under the tired. "I'm asking you to let me earn a roof and keep my girl alive. You pay me $1 a week and feed us. I cook, mend, help drive when needed. When spring opens the pass, I move on if you want." She paused. "Hard for me. Easy for you. You turn me out now. Winter do your work for you." He could have said no, could have told her he posted for a man because last winter had seen 3 ranches burned over by talk. How gossip about a woman on a spread with one man turned into excuses for drunks and bullies with rifles. He could have thought about neighbors' tongues, about Reese Carver downriver smirking and calling him soft. He could have weighed all that against his quiet and his herd. Instead, he looked at the sleeping baby in his palm and at Nora standing like she was braced for another blow. His choice hit him hard. "I pay you in feed and shelter this winter," he said slowly, voice rough. "No promises past thaw. You keep my house, my men's bellies, and your own baby too. We see how many days we can string together without losing tempers or cattle." He held out his free hand. Nora stared at it, then gripped it once, hard. "Done," she said. The first week was nothing but weather and work. Snow thick in the shaded drawers, slop in the yard by noon, roof creaking at night. Nora rose before dawn, moving quiet so as not to wake the baby, who slept in a drawer lined with blankets. By sunup the stove glowed, coffee boiled, biscuits hissed in the pan. Ben and Shorty, the two hands who'd signed on in autumn, stumbled in from the lean-to, eyes wide at the smell of real food. "It's like my ma's kitchen rose up," Shorty muttered, until Nora's look cut him off and sent him back to the door to scrape his boots. Thomas watched their faces soften around full plates, watched the cabin change, curtains cut from flour sacks at the windows, shelves in order, the baby's corner soft with quilts from old shirts. He pretended not to notice how his own shoulders eased with a low voice by the stove instead of the fire in an empty room. Danger came first as talk, not guns. Second week he hitched the wagon and rode into Harrow's Pass for flour and salt fat. Nora stayed with the baby, her face turned toward his tracks long after he vanished into the pines. In town, men leaned on the mercantile stove, trading heat and opinions. Thomas felt their eyes shift when he walked in. Reese Carver, who sat his horses on the spread below and hated that North Fork water cut through Riggs' soil, tipped his hat back and grinned. "Heard you filled that cook job, Riggs," he drawled, sliding a tin cup on the counter. Only no one saw a man step off the stage. Thomas kept his face blank. "She walked," he said, shrugging. "Cheaper that way." Reese's grin thinned. "Word is she walked out on more than a kitchen," he said, voice softer. "Some folks in Red Mesa claim a woman with a baby lightened the boarding house cash box and lit out. Marshal there don't ride this far for pennies, but men who like peace might take offense at you harboring a thief." Thomas sifted that like flour. Red Mesa was 2 days' ride and 3 kinds of trouble. Stories crossed mountains bloated, and men like Reese liked to turn them into tools. "If this woman stole," he said mildly, "she did a poor job. She came to my place with nothing but a baby and a satchel, no cash box, no silver, no coins falling out behind her." Reese leaned in, eyes sharp. "Women like that carry something you can't see," he said. "Trouble. You took that in when you opened your door. They don't sleep on the porch, they curl up in your life. One day the man they ran from comes knocking and your herd goes missing or your barn burns." He lifted his cup. "I'd send her on before the snow gets deep if I were you. Ain't enough roofs here to share with that kind of mess." Thomas laid his money down, took his flour and coffee, and walked out without answering, because any word would only feed Reese's grin. Back at the ranch, the wind had hardened the snow into crust that crunched under boots. Nora met him in the yard with the baby on her hip and flour on one cheek. "Any trouble?" he asked, passing her the sack. She shook her head, tied her hair back. "Ben and Shorty say coyotes tried the south fence," she said. "I chased them with your old pan." She held up a dented skillet. Thomas almost smiled over supper. He told her about town and Reese's words, watched her mouth tighten. "But chin stay up. They say women like me carry trouble," she said low. "They don't say nothing about the men who break their word and leave a mother to starve." She poked the fire harder than needed. "If someone coming for us, better they come now than when snow neck deep. Least they can see what they ride into." 3 days later, they came. Not the marshal, but 5 of Carver's riders. Hats low, bandanas up, breath steaming, rifles across their laps. Thomas and Ben were just stepping out to cut ice. Nora stood in the doorway with the baby wrapped against her. The leader, Carver's foreman, swung down, boots thudding on frozen ground. "Morning, Riggs," he said, like it was a charge. "Heard you took in a stray?" Thomas stayed where he was, axe in one hand. "What of it?" he asked. The foreman pulled a folded handbill, crude print and a smudged sketch, offered it across. "Word from down south says Nora Lane took wages from a boarding house, then skipped with Silver and a boss's kid," he said, eyes on the baby. "Marshall down there put his mark on this. Man with a conscience would hand a thief over instead of hiding her behind his walls." Nora stepped onto the porch, shoulders square, the baby fussing. She patted her. "I left that house because the owner put his hands where his rent didn't cover. she said, voice cutting the cold. He'd have claimed my girl next. He offered me half pay to stay quiet when a card game went bad and his friend shot a ranch hand in the alley. She looked at each rider. I took my baby and left. If a man wants to nail lies to a town board to keep himself clean, that's his sin, not mine. A younger rider shifted, eyes dropping, the foreman's jaw clenched. Tales, he snapped. Maybe truth. Maybe you spinning yarn to keep your warm corner? He looked at Thomas. You gonna stand between the law and this woman, Riggs? You think that fence holds if a marshal rides up wanting answers? If you were standing in a frozen yard with rifles in front of you, rumor at your back and a woman and baby behind your door, would you push them out to save your own skin or plant your boots and take the trouble on yourself? And if questions like that pull you in, remember to subscribe and keep riding these trails with us. Thomas felt every gaze, Carver's men, Ben and Shorty. Nora's eyes on his shoulders. He set the axe down slow, palms open. I posted for a cook, he said, and a woman with empty pockets and a hungry child answered. She's been feeding my crew and keeping this place up since she came. You want to drag her off on a piece of paper from 2 days' ride and a man none of us saw, that's your business, but you do it over my dead body. His voice stayed calm and hard. The foreman went a shade paler. He'd counted guns. Not backbone, one of the older riders muttered. This feels wrong, Jake. Snow that deep won't hide much. Jake spit into the frost. We ain't hanging nobody, he said. Just bringing her to town. Thomas didn't blink. And who meets her in town? He asked. Reese Carver, the man who's been drooling over my water since first frost. Whole Valley knows Reese would call a blizzard thief if it won him an acre. Silence stretched. The baby's small noises and leather creak the only sound. Then Jake shoved the handbill back into his coat. We ain't got badges to sort this, he said. But men talk, Riggs. More they talk, the less they ride when wolves knows your fence. He jerked his chin at Nora. You keep her. Her trouble's yours. He turned his horse. The others followed. Their leaving didn't ease Thomas's chest. It just moved the weight deeper. He watched them vanish into the pines, then turned back. Nora's face was white under flour and windburn. You didn't have to do that, she said, quiet but fierce. Could have told them you made a mistake, sent me and Clara on. Thomas shook his head. Your girl's legs wouldn't last to the first bend, he said. And I'm too old and too tired of cowards to start pushing women into storms so my barn looks cleaner. Her mouth trembled. She turned away. That night he heard her sob once when she thought everyone asleep. Winter tightened from both sides. Carver's men stopped coming by. In town, conversations died mid-sentence when Thomas walked in. The storekeep found his ledger interesting. Nobody said traitor out loud, but it sat in the room. When Nora and the baby finally came with him, a woman drew her child closer back at the ranch. Tracks appeared on the ridge at dusk, hoofprints that never came all the way, a coil of cut fence left hanging. Once a calf turned up dead by the creek. No predator sign, just a rope burn and a cut throat. Ben wanted to ride out and start something. Nora stopped him with one look. That's what they want, she said. They want this place empty or burning, not steady. You two out there firing at shadows give them both. Thomas split his nights between sleep and listening, the quiet outside loud as any alarm. One bitter morning when the sky was flat grey and breath froze hard, a wagon creaked up the track. Old Alma Reed on the buckboard, shawl wrapped thick, hair white. She'd delivered half the babies in the county and stopped more than one fight. She swung down before anyone could help. Eyes sharp. Heard my niece Nora landed up this way, she announced. Had to see if the man who took her in had the sense God gave a mule. Nora came out, baby on her hip, tears in her eyes at the sight. Alma hugged her hard, then gripped Thomas's arm till he straightened. She grilled him at his own table while stew simmered. You pay her what you promised, she demanded. She sleep in a bed or on your floor. You lift a hand to her, or just let other men do it for you from town. Thomas answered each, steady as the wind. Alma snorted once, looked around. This house got more life than since your pa died, she said. That girl don't flinch when you walk past, means you're doing something right. Don't let Valley cowards talk you into wrong. Alma brought news with the warmth. Some from Red Mesa, some from in between. A boarding house keeper who liked hired girls. Scared had indeed cried thief when one refused him. A ranch hand had died in an alley, shot in the back. but the shooter wore a better coat and had friends at the table. The marshal had looked away for a donation to town needs, leaving only the housekeeper as a mark, her and the baby. Nora listened with her jaw clenched. "This valley don't want that mud on its boots," Alma finished. "But mud runs downhill. Reese Carver's been sniffing after any tale that lets him push you off this land," she told Thomas. "Use this right and you can nail his boots to the floor instead. Use it wrong, and you'll be the one sliding." The test came a week later. Fresh snow driven through the basin, ice rimming the troughs. Carver himself rode up. Not just his men, 6 riders with him, horses blowing clouds, hats low, fine black coat, scarf neat, the kind of man who kept his own hands clean. Thomas stepped out with his coat open despite the cold, rifle in his hand but loose. Nora stood in the doorway shadow, Alma beside her, baby quiet. Carver's gaze swept the herd in the near pasture. The wood stacks, then Nora like she was another post. "Winter's always been hard up here, Riggs," he said smooth. "Shame to see a good spread starve because the man on it can't keep his nose out of other people's business." Thomas bristled but held. "If you came to talk weather, you rode far to waste breath," he replied. "If you came to poach cattle, I can count as well as you." Reese's eyes went flat. "I came to offer a way out of the hole you're digging," he said. "Papers from down south give me right to claim that woman and her bastard, you know it." He nodded at Nora. "You hand her over, I tie this neat and tidy. Maybe we talk trading water rights for cash that carries you somewhere less particular." His men shifted. The trap plane surrender the woman and child to buy a little quiet before the next excuse. Thomas felt something in him straighten. "I've been on this fork since before you knew how to sit a saddle square," he said. "My pa broke that soil. I busted my hands on the same rocks. I can't feed my herd on promises, but I sure won't feed them by selling out the only person who had less than me when she came." Carver's smile died. His hand flicked. 3 riders dropped rein. Alma stepped forward, smaller than any of them but filling the space. "You lay a hand on this girl or that baby, and every woman from here to Red Mesa will hear what you tried," she said, voice ringing. "Your wife's sisters will spit when you walk by, Reese, and you know it." He glared. "You old witch," he hissed, but didn't give the order. Nora stepped out fully, baby in her arms, snow dusting their shawl, eyes on Carver. "You think taking me fixes what you broke," she said quietly. "You think sending word south that you handled your problem keeps that dead man out of your sleep." She shifted Clara. "You come in my dreams," she said softer, "telling me my girl will grow in some back alley because a man who shot a ranch hand in the dark kept his chair. You want this ended? Stop hiding behind paper and men. Ride down with us and show the marshal what you paid him not to see." A murmur went through Carver's own men. Thomas stepped in. "You scared to ride into town with a woman, an old midwife, and one stubborn rancher, Reese?" he asked. "Or is your courage only good when your gun hands outnumber the folks you're pushing?" For a second it looked like Carver would choose the slow, mean route, burned stacks, poisoned wells, hired guns. But his pride didn't like being cornered in front of his riders. He sneered. "Fine," he snapped. "We ride at first light. I show the marshal the mess you dragged onto your place and let him sort thieves. But hear me, Riggs. If that uniform says she's guilty, I take her and that kid. And if you draw, then everyone will see who turned outlaw." Thomas nodded once. "Deal," he said. He didn't trust paper or badges much, but he trusted open ground and eyes, and the fact even a crooked town had some folks who knew rot when they smelled it. They rode in a tight knot at dawn, snow under the horses, baby bundled against Nora's chest, Alma driving the wagon behind, mouth set. Thomas rode with shoulders tight, hand near his rifle, not to start something but ready if someone else did. Red Mesa woke slow as they clattered in, faces at windows, men on porches, the marshal on the boardwalk, coat buttoned, eyes flicking from Reese's fine horse to the woman and child to Alma. "Alma Reed, what in God's cold name you dragged up my street?" he asked. Reese swung down, hand in his coat for the handbill. "Some thanks, Marshal. I bring you the woman you posted about and the folks hiding her." The Marshal's gaze sharpened. He looked at Nora, at Clara, at Thomas, at Alma. Weariness crossing his face, Nora stepped forward before Reese could hand over the paper. "You posted because that boarding house man told you a story," she said, voice steady. "He left out the part where he tried to have me in the pantry and called it wages, left out the part where his friend shot Ethan Clark in the back over a crooked hand, and offered me half pay to say I didn't see." She raised her voice so men on porches and women in doorways could hear. "Left out the part where your deputy took a roll of bills to look away and nail a picture of me instead." She hugged her baby closer. "This child's not stolen," she said. "She's mine. She's got no papa, because that card game went wrong, and he bled out in the dust while his boss and friends stepped over him." Silence dropped. The name Ethan Clark meant something here. Faces changed. A woman on a porch put a hand to her mouth. The Marshal's jaw tightened, eyes flicking to Reese, then to his deputy, who shifted. "That true, Lyle?" he asked the boarding house man in the doorway, dragged out by the noise. Lyle's face went red. "That girl's lying," he sputtered. "She took from me." "I never—" Alma cut in. "That boy's ma died last spring," she said, "but I sat with her before and heard her pray someone would speak truth over her son's grave." She pointed at Nora. "This is that someone, Marshal. You gonna let Reese buy your spine too?" Reese bristled. "Don't drag me in your town rot," he snapped. "I just came for what's owed." Thomas stepped in. "Debt cuts both ways," he said. "You ride my land with stories. You didn't check and wave papers that smell like the same money Lyle pushed at your deputy." He looked at the Marshal. "You want a war between North Fork and Valley? Keep blaming women and babies for men's choices. You want peace? You start by nailing the right names to your board." The standoff that followed wasn't just about guns, though. Hands hovered near them. It was about who owned the story. The Marshal's eyes moved from face to face, weighing fear and shame, the town listening. Finally, he sighed like a man who knew the road just got steeper. He took the handbill from Reese, looked at it, then tore it in half. "That's enough," he said, voice carrying. "This warrant's no good." Issued on the say-so of a man who left out more than he told, he turned to Nora. "You got the stomach to say what you just said again if it comes to it?" he asked. She nodded once. "Then you're no fugitive in my town," he said. "As for you—" he turned on Lyle and the deputy. His words went hard. "What you two are, we'll sort where you can't run." Reese swore under his breath, feeling his neat excuse turn on him. The ride back felt different. Air no warmer, snow no less deep. But something in Thomas's chest had eased. Nora rode with shoulders not so hunched. Alma dozed in the wagon with Clara in her arms. Reese didn't ride with them. He'd peeled off with 3 riders and a scowl, his pride raw. Thomas knew trouble wasn't gone. Men like Carver didn't forget being forced back. But if he hounded the Riggs place now, he'd do it in front of a valley that had heard the truth and seen his hand in trying to bury it. The circle of pressure had cracked enough to breathe. Winter stayed hard. Weeks of grey sky and white ground, days of wood chopped, stock watered, meals cooked, nights in the cabin with the stove humming and the baby growing heavier in every pair of arms. Ben whittled her a pine horse. Shorty let her gum his finger and pretended not to care when she cried if he stepped out. Alma came and went, sled tracks marking her path, bringing news, herbs, and sometimes pie from a widow who'd heard the tale and decided maybe a woman on a spread alone wasn't such a sin if it came with backbone. Reese's men rode the ridge now and then, but stayed high, hands off the fence. The test had gone against them once. They were wary of taking it again in front of witnesses. Inside, small routines settled. Nora snapped at Thomas for tracking snow on her clean floor. He grumbled and built a boot scraper. She taught him to stretch a stew, father. He taught her to read the sky for bluff storms and real ones. Clara's first laugh came one evening when Thomas stomped in with icicles on his mustache and pretended to sneeze them off. The sound startled them all. then warmed the room in a way the stove never could. Money still ran thin, fences still snapped. Tempers flared when bones ached and wind howled too long, but under it ran a new thread, stubborn and strong, being bound together by something chosen, not just endured. By spring, when the snow shrank and the mud came, calves dropped in the pasture and the river roared high. Folks talked different about the Riggs place. Some still whispered that Thomas's house was half home, half scandal, but quieter now because their wives had started sending bread up on wash day, and their sons had watched Nora stand straight in front of Reese's horse. Clara tottered in the yard on unsteady legs, fists full of old dry grass, laughing. Thomas watched her and thought about the thin line between a child stamping dust in his yard and a child buried by a wagon road. That line had been a scrap of paper on a wall and a door he hadn't shut. It had changed their lives and the valley's stories. By the time the first new snow dusted the ridges again, there was no posting on the mercantile wall for a cook at the Riggs place, just a blunt note asking for 2 hands who could ride hard and keep their mouths shut about other people's business. Men came, worked, and found themselves eating at a table where an old midwife, a once homeless mother, a child born into trouble, and a rancher who had chosen the hard side of a simple choice shared bread without shame, out on the frontier, where winter stripped lies down and men's names rode ahead of them. The weight of a choice like Thomas's didn't fade. It settled into the beams of the house and into the tales folks told their children about who to trust when trouble knocked. One man had posted for a cook before winter, and a homeless mother and her baby had taken the job. What he got back was more than warm meals. He got a family forged out of risk and stubborn mercy, and a valley that had watched the price of standing between the easy lie and the hard truth. If stories of that kind of rough courage and made family speak to you, swing back into the saddle with us, subscribe, and ride on to the next western night where another hard choice waits just beyond the firelight.